I will get the recording going right now. So, this is kind of a left turn in the class a little bit because we're really starting to get away from a lot of biology and starting to talk.
I had people talking mid-lecture though, so just a quick rundown on what it was mostly about. To me, it was mostly just about the relationship side of sexual relationships.
Well, I think predominantly I would like you to be. I mean, there were a lot of things presented in the lecture, but I focused fairly heavily on operational sex ratios and reproductive skew, as it kind of contributes to the frequency of casual sex and people's willingness to engage in casual sex. So we really started with the short-term aspects of relationships. So let's see. I'm gonna dig into the discussion questions, but do you have anything that you want to throw out there?
Well, I have one question that I guess doesn't really pertain to the lecture, but you brought it up and it just reminded me of the question.
Okay.
Is the fact that why did China ever put the one-child ban on their country?
Well, that's a good question. I feel like I knew that at one point. I guess I don't know. I don't know the precise logic, but my understanding is that culturally, people valued male children more than female children. So well, first off, so the restriction was put into place that there wouldn't be overpopulation. So they wanted people to have few children. I mean, there are tons of people in Asia, and many of them are concentrated in cities. So I think there was a very real concern about cities especially becoming overpopulated. So they certainly have plenty of rural area to expand into. So I think the idea was to kind of control the birth rate and therefore control explosive population expansion. I think the problem though was that it got combined with this kind of cultural valuing of male children more than female children. And
Carry on the name and so on, I know.
yeah, and so I think what happened was the children who were most favored, children who were kind of given the best like nurturance and really the best chance to survive, ended up being the male children. So you ended up getting this huge disproportion in how many men versus women ended up growing up to old age. And so now you've got this huge disparity. I forget what the exact ratio is.
My question is, why didn't it just limit it to 2 children, 1 male, 1 female?
I do not know. I mean, even in that, it's not gonna.
It would still increase the population by only half the population, but then it would stagnate.
Well, so the you can't really control which sex a child is going to be. So even if you had them birth 2 children, it's not like that would solve the gender ratio problem. In fact, it may have even made it even worse.
Actually, no, it wouldn't stagnate. It would just increase indefinitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ideal is that people kind of want to achieve replacement, right? Where the number of children being born is proportional to the number of people alive, so that there's not too much growth. But that does tend to be 2 children. I'm not sure why they chose 1 child. That's a very good question. I know now they're regretting it, and I think it was clearly ill-formed. But the original logic that fed into that, I'm not too familiar with. If you look into that and you figure it out, I'd be happy to know. Let's see. Okay, here's a pretty good question. Is it physical attraction or romantic love that propels people to get into relationships more? That's an interesting question.
It
Because
depends more on what you personally like in a person, what sexuality you are.
yeah, and I suppose what your predominant motives are for getting into a relationship. If you're someone who's looking for a short-term, I mean, even if so, you could be explicitly looking for a short-term casual thing, or you could be someone who just prefers more casual relationships. If that's the case, I would guess that people would rely more heavily on physical attractiveness because that is the trait that is probably going to be most important to you in a short-term context. Whereas, I mean, romantic love, what you're looking for with love is you're looking for not just the passion, but you're looking for shared goals, intimacy. You're looking for some amount of commitment from the other person. And so, unless you are really looking to form that kind of partnership with someone, which is what a long-term relationship is, it's a partnership. You're probably not going to prioritize that. But maybe I don't. Maybe the question is more of like, what grabs you first, right? Because people have this experience not just of looking at someone and being like, well, hot damn, you are extremely attractive. I just want to be near you. They can also have this profound experience of like this person, even at like just several minutes of interaction, this person seems like I could really get along with them. You almost fall in love in that moment, and I do think that that can be different from kind of lusting after someone. So it's an interesting question of when you have that kind of like intense initial reaction towards someone, how often is that motivated by physical attractiveness versus motivated by love or like being impressed by their personality? Do you have an intuition about those, Ivor?
I'm sorry, I spaced out for a sec.
But like, do you when people have that initial like explosive attraction to someone, do you feel like you could separate that explosive attraction into physical attraction versus this kind of like romantic love attachment, just like really loving their personality and stuff? Do you feel like on average it tends to be more of that tends to be physical attractiveness or kind of romantic love? I mean, what are the components of that explosive attractiveness?
I feel like it has a lot to do with personal sexuality and gender. For instance, females are probably going to be more willing to be attracted to someone who they have an emotional connection with for the sake of if they plan on pursuing a family with that person, they want to make sure that the relationship lasts and not just, oh, yeehaw. Although some women do go for just the hot guys in general just because they're cute.
Right.
But also as a matter of sexuality in the sense that being straight, bi, pan, or stuff of that nature, it is more or less about the physical attractions, whereas things like demisexuals are more on the emotional attraction.
Mm-hmm. So what did you say the first one? So demisexuals, I understand. But would you say that was more physically motivated?
Well, being like straight, lesbian, gay, or bi, or pan, but I
Mm.
feel like pan's more on the emotional side as well. But still.
Do you think there's I mean I guess relative to being demisexual, which I guess for anyone who's not familiar with that term, it refers to someone who usually needs to form a deep romantic connection with someone before they feel comfortable or even want to have sex with them. So I guess relative to demisexual, anyone else is going to seem like they're more interested in physical attractiveness. Do you feel like even within those different sexual orientations, like differences between heterosexual people versus people who are gay, lesbian, pansexual, do you feel like are there any groups within there where you feel like physical attraction might matter more? Like
Great
when
man.
when I think of pansexual, I think of someone for whom gender either may not matter at all, or they are open to a variety of gendered expressions in their potential partners. And so, I don't know, is there going to be individuals who are pan? Do you feel like they will prioritize physical versus the romantic part of things more? Do you have an intuition about that?
For me personally, being what I assume is pan, I look towards the actual interpersonal relationship first and have physical attraction being like a secondary requirement.
Right, right. That's my impression. I don't know. People for whom, I don't know. This is me going out on a limb, so I want to say this is not backed by any science that I know, but I get the sense that people for whom gender is kind of a secondary characteristic when you're looking for a romantic partner, um, may not prioritize physical attractiveness as much, at least compared to a person's personality and all these other traits. I don't know.
Like I said, I just personally see physical attraction as a secondary requirement.
Yeah.
Although
Right.
I will say that lately I've been having some preferences towards one or the other gender, but I really don't have an actual preference.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, and that's sexuality is fluidity. It's expected really of almost most people, even people who are exclusively heterosexual, predominantly heterosexual. There is at least within the lifetime some amount of fluctuation, which I think people don't appreciate enough. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it's not a. This is an interesting question because it's not one that I guess I've thought about too much. Do people who have premarital sex typically regret it? Well, that's also a complicated question because in societies where premarital sex is stigmatized, where it is you can get into some heated water for having premarital sex. Chances are, if you regret it, a lot of that regret might come from the punishment that you then experience afterwards from the people around you, right? So you might regret it and say, "Oh man, I wish I hadn't done that," because in some ways, people made your life harder afterwards, right? I guess the other aspect of it, though. By the way, I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback from your mic, Cypher. You'd like maybe just yeah, thank you, and then just open it up as need be. I guess the other aspect of this is when you have sex before marriage, one of the big appeals of marriage is that people are formally and publicly unified, right? They are a couple, not just between themselves, but in the eyes of other people. And so it can make it, I think, especially I think this is a sex difference that you see a lot where, women really want to get married, men can either take it or leave it. I think that marriage really, in some way, guarantees a partner's commitment. Because if you get married publicly and then to get a divorce or to separate, then can affect your reputation with other people, right? It can kind of, marriage, I think, can make you resistant to being abandoned by a partner. So to the degree that you could have sex before marriage and then get pregnant by someone before you have that almost guaranteed commitment from them, you could regret it because the partner may no longer be around to help support you, or to help support the child. So those are the two variables that I would expect would predict regret, is if society is against it and they make your life hard for having it, or if you have sex and then it creates this this problem, this child that you have to take care of without the guaranteed commitment of a partner. Now, in terms of statistics of how often people regret it, my understanding is that at least within industrialized societies, the vast majority of people do not regret it. They may regret having sex with certain people, but just simply having premarital sex, not so much. At least not so much in, again, predominantly Western industrialized societies. Premarital sex is quite common. All right, let's see. The textbook states that men are more appealed to casual sex than women. Is this due to sexual attraction or commitment issues? I think it could potentially be both. I can say with some confidence that it's going to be sexual attraction because men do appear to have a tendency towards partner variety specifically. So having sex with different people, not just sex drive in general. But then beyond that, if we think back to parental investment theory and about what is optimal for men versus women, men's reproduction is maximized by really having sex with and producing children by as many different partners as possible. And if you commit to any given partner, what that could do is it could get in the way of having sex with other partners. So in some ways, you might expect that men would be resistant to commitment as part of that strategy. Do men have commitment issues? I would say predominantly overall, predominantly yes. Not everyone, not every man does, but predominantly I would expect that that is the case. How you doing, Cypher? Want to throw anything in here?
Maybe one of my questions. I'm really spaced off today. I really do apologize.
Well, that's fine. I understand you've been busy. And it certainly isn't fair in some ways for you to be here and carry discussion every single week. So,
Yeah, but I mostly just blame the spacing outness. I didn't get that much hours of sleep because I couldn't sleep last night, and this entire week has been busy.
Mhm.
So, well, my next question I guess I have on my list is, why is casual sex not more common in the youth? 18 plus, of course. Like, overall, just why is just sex stigmatized from all ages? Because I can understand why it's not common amongst older people, 30 and above, because they're starting their lives, they got work, they got less free time, and they're most likely already married, and therefore don't want to cheat. But just in younger generations, why is it just not a common occurrence?
So wait, so why is sex not a common occurrence, or why is there stigma against sex?
Why both? Let's answer it both ways, but it's mostly why is it not a common? Why is casual sex between people who aren't even in a proper relationship more common?
Why is it more common among young people? Well, I would say it's more common, and it's probably in comparison to older individuals who may be starting their life, right? Or who may not starting their life, but because life doesn't start when you have children. But for people who are having children, casual. I mean, there is a in kind of evolutionary psychological literature, there is a distinction between what's called mating effort and parenting effort. And those two things can also often get in the way of one another. The mating effort is that effort that you put into with having sex with people, with different people, for the sake of kind of building relationships or identifying relationship partners. Versus parenting effort is more, you have a partner, you have children with them, and now you need to invest in those children. Sometimes when you are a parent and you have to put effort towards children, that's going to eat into the time that you could otherwise spend socializing with new people, finding new sexual partners. So I mean, it's honestly just like planning your Google Calendar, right? It's like if you have so many things going on throughout the day, you may not have time, you may not find the right time to meet new people and have sex with new people. I think it's honestly just it's a time commitment thing. I guess another part of it though would be that when you're people who are younger, on average, will know less about who their ideal partner is. So I think that when you're younger, you may have an instinctual, almost impulsive gut feeling of who you're attracted to and the kinds of things that you find attractive, but you may not have a really sophisticated understanding of who you're compatible with, like in the long term, who you could form a relationship with. And so a lot of the early years tend to be spent just kind of jumping from relationship to relationship, testing out new partners, seeing what traits work well with you, and then learning, you know what, this kind of personality I just can't stand, so I'm not going to date anyone like this anymore. Or I'm going to be a little bit more skeptical about dating someone like this. Versus when you're older, you have all this experience, and now you can say, you know what, I'm now settled. Perhaps I'm in a long-term relationship because I sifted through a bunch of the garbage and I finally found what I was looking for. Some people have conceptualized casual sex that way. Is casual sex is a way to test the waters, see what works for you, make a bunch of bonds, see which ones last. I don't know. Does that kind of make sense? I find that very compelling. The idea that casual sex is a way to test relationships or test their potential relationship partners.
Just saying mostly because you always hear from children and whatnot being like, oh yeah, I had sex with that girl last week, when they're like, don't even know what sex is. But like, in an actual sense, I don't really think it's that common. And it's not just from personal experience, it's just I don't really ever hear anyone actually talking about their love life in that nature, even in the younger generation. That's what the question was about.
I see. So you're actually taking the opposite stance, that
Not common.
Not common among younger people. That's interesting. Would you say that it's more common when people are older?
No, it's not. It's probably less common then, because they have their life together and aren't really out playing the fields, as they say.
Yeah. So you would just guess that on average, people are just not having that much casual sex.
Yeah. I mean, of course, you might have the couple of chads out there that have sex every week, maybe 3 times a week, but like overall, the average Joe ain't gonna have that much sex, and that's why I'm wondering why is it not that common.
Right. Well, that kind of brings in reproductive skew, right?
Yeah.
So reproductive skew is a few individuals have vastly more success than everyone else. And that is something that you see in humans, you see it in other species too. I think one of my favorite species, I love gorillas. I think gorillas are so cool. And what they do, so lowland gorillas will form, or is it lowland? It is lowland. Lowland gorillas, so these are gorillas that tend to not live in the mountains, but kind of near the base and in the jungles of Africa. They will actually form harems. They'll form kind of, female gorillas will willingly kind of live with these very large, what they're called silverback gorillas. And the silverback gorillas provide protection. They, of course, mate with them and therefore produce children and then protect those children. And really what that situation creates, a harem, is when you have multiple women with one male. What that situation creates is you're going to have, one male out reproducing many of the other males in the area. So you have a reproductive skew where a few are having all the reproductive success. I guess I sort of buy into what you're saying, is that people, when we talk about the number of partners that someone has, so that is, when someone says, oh yeah, I slept with like 10, 20, 30, 40 women in the past like couple of months, that is either untrue or they are so exceptionally attractive that they can pick up women extremely easily. But for the vast majority of people, you're not going to see that. But I think that's different from saying, are people practicing casual sex? Because people might be having sex with just a few people, or sorry, they're getting together with just a few people. When they get together with those people, and they're having casual sex with them, so the relationship tends to kind of be potentially more short-lived, even though people are having fewer of them. I'm trying to think of any empirical evidence that would definitively answer that question of, are people who are younger actually having as much casual sex as they are purported to have? People are having more casual sex than they did in the past, at least without restriction. But whether that is still a lot, whether there's a lot of casual sex going on, still might not be much, but it's more than it used to be. If that makes sense.
My last question I have on the list is about sexual differences between the sexes in the wild. More specifically, are there any other examples of very drastic changes between the male and female? For instance, that in like spiders or praying mantises, where the males are way, way smaller than the females. Why did that happen? What made that occur?
Oh, why are males typically smaller? It's because they're sperm delivery systems. When the female is usually much larger because she's the one responsible for protecting the clutch. So here's what you're going to see. You're going to see the greatest differences between men and women when men invest less into the offspring. So if you're talking about a species where the male and the female get together, they bump uglies, they produce a child, and the male just kind of goes off, what you'll see is that the male in some cases might be huge, right? Like in the case of gorillas, male gorillas are much larger than female gorillas. And that exists because the males have to compete rather than kind of staying with one individual and just kind of being happy with that one partner for their entire life. They may constantly be competing with other males. And so the larger male is going to be able to more effectively compete. So there's a pressure for men to get really large in those situations, whereas there's not a pressure for women to get large. The different situation where you're talking about like praying mantises or like black widow spiders, right? Where the male has sex with the female, the male is much smaller, and then the female might even eat the male, right? In those situations, it's usually that the female is responsible for taking care of that clutch of eggs or the offspring that are created, and she has to gestate those eggs. She has to spend some of her bodily resources to developing those children before they're laid, potentially. And so she may need more body mass to store more fat or nutrients to nourish those children, and then be larger and stronger to fend off predators so that those eggs do not get eaten, etc.
Same thing applied to anglerfish, where I understand that the male, after choosing their mate, physically fuses with the female anglerfish until they're one species or one creature.
Oh, interesting. Really? I hadn't heard of that.
Well, yeah, I don't know which species of anglerfish, but it's like the same one that was in Nemo. But yeah, the male will actually bond with the female, fusing their body parts together, almost like certain types of worms. And then the male becomes completely dependent on the female, like for blood, even.
That's very interesting. Wow, I hadn't really heard that. But yeah, you're right. I'm seeing that. Yeah, it's almost like a black widow spider eating the male, right? Because if they fuse, then the male gets to contribute his cells, his body mass to the developing to the female fish's ability to develop that egg, to develop that offspring. I wonder if that's why. Huh. Very interesting.
Question though is just why do those drastic sexist differences occur? And I guess the overall answer is because it's mostly the female that takes the dominant and parenting role of the children.
Yeah, it's very broadly, the explanation is men and women are going to have different evolutionary pressures. So that is, in the case of gorillas, men have the pressure of competition from other males. So they're going to get larger to be able to compete with other males. Versus women will not have that pressure, so they tend to stay small. In black widow spiders, women have the pressure of needing to defend their clutch of eggs, of needing to nourish that clutch of eggs. So for her to have more mass within her body so that she can provide that nutrition and protection, that's a pressure that she has to face, but the male spider does not. So the male spider is not going to be as big. So
I guess the last way to answer that question is because other species don't have to abide by human gender roles.
How do you mean? That's interesting.
Because the female is the one that parents or cares for the children or protects the family.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a human gender role.
Yeah, so humans are somewhat, so the differences, when you talk about differences between men and women, the term for that is sexual dimorphism. So di means two, morphism is shape, so it's two different shapes of the male and female. In humans, there is sexual dimorphism. Men and women look different in a lot of ways, but they're not so drastically different. They're not like gorilla and female, male and female gorilla different. Male gorillas are literally twice the weight of female gorillas. For humans, there is a difference, but it's not as drastic. So what you actually see is in species that are relatively more monogamous, or at least where the fathers have to invest some amount of effort into the children for those children to survive, you tend to see that the men and women are more similar. Humans are a decent example of that. Probably the best examples, I would say, are gibbons. I don't know if you've ever seen a gibbon before.
I think I have. I know what you're going for.
They look
basically identical.
Yeah, they look the same. Like the male and female, you can barely tell them apart. And they are lifelong maters. Usually what they do is they find one other gibbon, they mate with that gibbon, and they're with that gibbon for the rest of their lives. They're extremely monogamous. So humans seem to be this compromise between a monogamous and a promiscuous species. But on the whole, because our children are highly dependent on parents, you often see that humans tend towards monogamy, just for the purpose really of raising children. Outside of raising children, that's when you see humans being promiscuous. So before humans have children, there's a lot of promiscuity, there's casual sex. And then funnily enough, older adults, casual sex is really common in older adults. I don't know if you've ever heard of you don't have children anymore. They've flown the nest. They're on their own. That's when parents get really weird and kinky. Or if you've ever heard of like old folks homes, there is a huge problem with the spread of STDs within old folks homes because they're usually all having sex with one another. And this may not be something you want to think about, but it's like,
actually, I find it interesting.
Yeah, once you're past menopause, so women can't have children past the age of like 55 or so. That's when menopause strikes. So there's really no risk anymore. You can have sex with whomever you want, and if there's no disease involved, you're not going to get pregnant. So if you just want to have sex recreationally, you're free to do so. The problem is people don't take into consideration that you can spread like syphilis and AIDS and all this stuff. So, that gets into an old folks home, and then you have an outbreak. But that's kind of the unspoken part of human sexuality is what happens in later life, and people get randy later in life. That's for sure.
Oh, and then the opposite. Yeah, I guess you're right.
You also see that so there's a type of consensual non-monogamy called swinging, which is when couples swap partners. Swinging is more common within older individuals. Consensual non-monogamy, certain types of polyamory where you form multiple romantic, emotionally intimate relationships, that's more of a younger generation. That's more of a, predominantly you'll see people about age 30 or so. But that's a different dynamic. With swingers, it's usually about the sex. It's usually about like the physical sensations. So when you get older, those physical sensations, just having sex for the purpose of recreation, seems to become more important again. That's a good question. Yeah, it's the difference between kind of the sexes. It's sexual selection. That's what it comes down to. Certain sexes have.
Learned something new about anglerfish.
yeah, no, true. I didn't know that. That's very interesting. Okay, let's look at some other questions here. Okay, this is actually a pretty good question. Do you believe that casual sex is okay, or do you think people should wait until marriage? And I have my personal opinion about this. I think that casual sex is okay as long as people are safe about it. But there are so many restrictions, especially religious restrictions, against casual sex that I always try to take the devil's advocate, take the opposite side of this, and ask myself, if we enter a world where people are very, very comfortable having sex with each other, possibly even on like a friendly basis, or just like it's part of like casually getting along with someone, like it's just totally socially acceptable to have casual sex with people, as long as you're like using condoms, you're being safe about it. Is there any problem with that? Like, what if casual sex became so common and so accepted that friends could do it, and it wouldn't be a big, wouldn't be a big problem? That became like the predominant norm. Would there be any harm to that?
Yes and no. It's not really, and lust isn't one of the 7 deadly sins for nothing. It's not necessarily like you'll go to hell or anything, or even I'm saying I'm Christian. I'm more just someone's having too much sex, then they aren't out doing more productive activities. Like getting rid of stigma, it would be great, but like having too much of it at the same time would be bad in its own right.
It's interesting. I guess
moderation sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess.
Although I do agree we should get rid of the stigma and the whole stigma around sex. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's not bad. It's just sex.
Right. Right. Yeah, I guess anything in excess could be bad for you, right? So if you're having sex to the degree that you stop going to your job, that you stop caring for your family, you stop taking care of yourself or whatever, then clearly that's bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I guess my question that I totally bastardized from the original question is like, what if casual sex became like a handshake, right? Not that you're doing it problematically, that you're doing it like excessively, but that just like very casually, you can be like, hey, I met you for the nice first time. I find you very attractive, and just to get to know you, you want to have sex?
I mean, that would be one heck of a way to try and get to know someone. Like,
Right.
not only are you going to get to your most intimate feelings immediately, you'll find out who they are as a person, and pretty much quite a lot about them real quick. So I mean, yeah,
That could
I
be a good
suppose that
thing.
would be somewhat useful.
I'd like to draw a parallel with, have you ever heard of bonobos before? You know what a
Yes,
bonobo is?
should have heard about those. Mike's not picking up very well, it seems.
Sorry, your mic or my mic?
I
Oh yeah, no, so you're kind of fading in now.
think it's mostly that I'm mumbling.
Okay. Sorry, have you heard of bonobos? I didn't catch that.
Yes, pretty sure I
Yeah,
have.
yeah. I love bonobos. I think bonobos are so cool because for anyone who doesn't know, these are a very close ancestor. Well, not an ancestor because they exist at the same time, but bonobos and chimpanzees share a descendant, an evolutionary descendant. So bonobos look a lot like chimps. They're usually a little bit smaller, but really the big difference is their difference in how their societies are structured. Bonobos, for them, sex is this very like casual, practically like a handshake. Bonobos will often use sex to resolve conflict. So if two people are, if two bonobos are really pissed at each other, or they got into a fight, or one of them kind of wanted to show submission to the other, or they wanted to like show kind of a respect for one another, they might just have sex. They might do called genito rubbing. It's basically bonobos scissoring, but it's basically like a handshake for them, where they can kind of. I mean, sex feels good, and so it's like grooming another individual. Many chimps and other primates will groom each other. They'll pick lice and other parasites out of another individual's hair as a bonding mechanism. Same deal. They have sex as a bonding mechanism. And what's kind of interesting about bonobo societies is that they tend to be matrilineal. They social status tends to be given to females. So the highest ranking individuals within the societies tend to be female bonobos. So you see a lot of this casual sex happening between the female bonobos and sometimes among the males, but it's less so among the males. It's more of a female thing. So there are examples of other species engaging in very casual sex. It's non-reproductive, and they don't need commitment from one another before they engage.
Not sure how well it would translate over to humans.
Yeah, and I guess that gets at it. Is there anything that's unique about humans that would get in the way of our being able to do the same thing?
Personalities, us wanting to make it political, and there's diseases, and And there's the whole thing with age. We can't universally agree on what an age of consent is. So therefore, someone from China who's coming over to America, from Japan, who's coming over to America to visit, doesn't have sex with a 14-year-old. Well, to them that's perfectly fine because the age of consent there is 14. But here, that's literal pedophilia. So that's just where I'm at with it. It's just we can't all universally agree between personalities to age of consent laws to any of that. But it would just, to me, I feel like it would just cause a lot more harm than good at that point.
We have so many systems in place that to adopt at least to adopt that universally it would be a huge undertaking. I actually didn't know the age of consent in Japan is.
Actually, no, I think it's 13 now.
13, yeah. Wow, that's interesting.
I'll look it up to confirm myself because I don't want to be telling a lie.
Right. Huh. Yeah. I mean, clearly a lot of things would have to change about society for casual sex to be that common.
Yeah.
And to be used in the way that bonobos would use it.
It's 13 in in metropolis like Tokyo, but mostly it's 14 in China, and it's 16 in Hong Kong. So yeah, just all those in general to us, it's like, yeah, why would you try and fuck someone that young? Then
Right.
it's just like, well, it's because our life expectancy is 30.
Right.
This is my thing with it. It's just to try and implement it into our current world wouldn't work, but in a world where it's just always been a thing. In that case, I really just think that there's actually a more likely scenario that we wouldn't have diseases because everyone would be having them so much, we might have just grown a natural immunity to it. So,
Well, I suppose that's possible, depending on the disease. Some diseases are.
I'm just talking. Just Homo sapiens thing was just like bonobos and had sex commonly and like a handshake since they first decided to pick up a stick and stab something. It's been that way for all of. I think at that point, a lot of diseases, sexual diseases, wouldn't actually be diseases anymore. The biggest problem probably being somewhere around AIDS. But AIDS would probably be more like a, oh no, you caught it, but you'll be over it in a month.
Well, the way that disease works is not that the more you get it, the better you are at fighting off.
I'm more talking about that the body would be more understanding of it and be able to distinguish it and fight it off itself. Not the fact that won't get it anymore.
No,
the body would be able to.
That's not true either. So diseases are not some static organism. It's not like for example, it's not like every coronavirus is like even COVID-19. It's not that every instance of COVID-19 is precisely the same for every single person. They are organisms. They reproduce.
I do understand that.
Change.
I was just saying that in the far-off parallel universe where casual sex was a thing, I was just thinking, after millions and millions and millions and millions of generations of sex, then eventually the body would try and build up defenses against said diseases. Not the fact that they would just go away because I know that they're their own organism and they're very different.
And you're right. Our bodies would build up defenses, but the bacteria or the disease would also build up defenses against our defenses. We are in a constant co-evolutionary race with disease. We're trying to one-up them and they're trying to one-up us. So a million years from now, it's not going to be that we're going to get over disease. It's going to be that the combat looks different because we are extremely well adapted to each other.
So that being said, even though our current diseases such as AIDS, hepatitis, and chlamydia and all that well, they may not be around anymore. We might have something a lot worse.
Maybe, yeah, actually, and so there's already evidence that this happens. I mean, this is the problem with antibiotics. The looming threat to human society right now is that our antibiotics are actually becoming less effective. I don't know if you realize this, but they're becoming less effective.
Terrifying to me.
Yeah, no, it should be. I mean, this is a huge existential threat for humans in general, is that antibiotics are becoming less effective. And the reason they're becoming less effective is, well, I mean, the big reason is people don't use them correctly. So, I mean, this is how an understanding of evolution can help too. I'll explain. I'll try to my best to explain this. But when you take antibiotics, you usually have to take a course of them across like a series of like a week to 14 days or something like that. And the reason you have to do that is you're trying to shock the system so much that you kill every single bacteria. So when you kill every single bacteria, then none of them can reproduce. If you take antibiotics though, and you only take like 7 days or 13 out of the 14 days, what could happen is you kill the vast majority of the bacteria. Then there are a few that survived that had a slight resistance to the antibiotic. They're alive because they were resistant. And if you let them go and you stop blasting them with antibiotic, they will then get to reproduce and they'll create copies of themselves. And those copies will also be resistant to antibiotic. So if you get the disease, you treat it with antibiotic incompletely, it goes away for a little bit, it can then come back. And when it comes back, the antibiotics don't work anymore because the new disease that just popped up is entirely resistant to that antibiotic that you were treating the old disease with. Does that make sense? If you only, this is, I mean, when you get prescribed, people, I've seen so many people do this where they take antibiotics only until they feel better, and they're like, you know what, I feel better, I don't have to take the rest of these antibiotics. The problem is they've only killed enough of the bacteria that they are at a point where they're not showing symptoms, but they still have some of that bacteria in them. And the bacteria that is left is the stuff that's resistant to the antibiotics. The ones that are left over, they reproduce, and now you're sick again with antibiotic-resistant bacteria. This happens a lot. It happens. This is a huge problem, and no one's figured out how to solve it yet. I mean, we keep creating new antibiotics, more powerful antibiotics, but the bacteria just keep fighting us back, and it's projected. I forget the exact estimate, but it's like within like the next 20 or 30 years, the vast majority of the diseases that we have cures for, we won't have cures for them anymore. So fun fact, if you have anything, if you didn't have anything to worry about in your life, there's something else you can worry about.
Yeah, I love worrying about the fact that all of our medicines will be obsolete by the end of the year.
Maybe not the end of the year, but
in a few generations, our entire medical history will be obsolete.
yeah,
The superbug much worse than COVID has ever wanted to be.
Right, exactly.
Oh yes, that feels so safe.
There's I mean, we're smart, we adapt, and so I think that we will make changes that prolong that kind of elongate that window. People are working on this problem. It's just that if we were to continue at the pace that we are currently using antibiotics, it would be a problem. They over prescription of antibiotics is one of the big drivers of it too. Is even if someone has like a cold is caused by a virus, which antibiotics don't kill viruses. And so what might happen is a doctor who doesn't know any better might say, you've got all these symptoms. Well, it might be a virus, it might be something else. So let me just give you an antibiotic, see if it works. That's a terrible practice, because if it is a virus and you take that antibiotic, you might end up kind of killing off the non-resistant bacteria, creating resistant bacteria, and then those resistant bacteria can combine with disease-causing bacteria to create antibiotic-resistant disease-causing bacteria. It's a huge problem. Always, here's the lesson. If you get prescribed antibiotics, take the whole damn thing. Make sure that if you get prescribed for 14 days, you take it for 14 days. That's how you can prevent this forest fire.
Only you can prevent a superbug from destroying all of humanity.
That's right. All right, I'm looking at some other discussion questions here. So this is kind of a question about one of the articles that I asked you to read about ex-partners, about men kind of viewing their ex-partners more favorably than women do. The question is, do women view their ex-partners differently based on how serious their relationship was? I guess I can't really, we can't go too far with this because we don't have any women in the room, and it's kind of silly to answer a question like that without.
Yeah, I think we might have to skip this one.
We may.
But I do want to say this about it, though.
It's just such a very interesting question.
I do want to say this about it, though. Why we gotta hate the exes? And primarily females, is always you have to hate your ex. There's no can't be friends with them, can't be acquaintance with them, can't just leave them out of your life for good and never even talk to them. No, it has to be you have to hate them. You have to be discouraged with your earth. Every problem that you have in your life is their fault. Even if it was a mutual breakup.
Why do you think that's the case? I mean, why do we hate on our exes so much?
I don't know. Like, I could tell between my mom and dad that they don't hate each other, and they divorced. Like, 20 years married, and, about 20 years married, and they divorced. And, like, every girlfriend dad has had afterwards, including including our aunts, our adopted aunts we used to live with, all wanted dad to hate mom. They demonized her. They made her seem like a bad person. They fucking made me want to hate my own mother, and so on and so forth, all because of that whole stigma of you gotta hate your ex.
Okay, actually, there's some logic there. Okay, if your dad maintained a good relationship with your mother, and then he started dating new women, why would those women not like her?
Well, of course, dad started dating after the breakup, obviously, and, well, dad's relationship with mom wasn't the best. They did have regular fights, but it was always simple things. I don't want to talk about the relationship fully on the recording, but I'll end it quickly.
Oh, sure.
But for the most part, I just don't understand the whole stigma with it. Like, yes, I understand that some women might be like, oh, well, what does she have that I don't? But, I don't know if you have that yet. We haven't been dating for a month, basically.
That's the risk, though. So it may not even be that, but if you are in good terms with someone that you used to date, then there is always the possibility that you'll start dating them again. It's like when you break up with an ex and you demonize them and you can't stand them and you never talk to them, that's pretty good evidence that you're never going to go back to them, right? Or at least it makes it more likely that you're not going to go back to them. So if you're on good terms with an ex, there's almost this lingering question of, wait, why are you still friends? How often do you hang out? Do you spend time with her? Are you still in love with her to some degree? And I think that can drive a lot of people crazy when their partner is still friends with their ex. I think that to some degree the stigma might come from those people who are threatened by an ex. You know, might say you shouldn't be friends with your ex because that's a risk to me that you might go back to them. So it makes total sense to me that, you know, if new women started dating your dad and your dad was still on good terms with your mom, they may not realize just maybe how, I don't know, if it was toxic, they may not realize how toxic it was, and they may not have a full picture of how unlikely it is for him to go back to her. They're just operating on the information that they're still friends, so something could happen there. That's my guess. I think that that's where this kind of ex hating comes from. Is, even if, so let's say that your dad doesn't recreate a romantic long-term relationship with your mom. It still could be that he could have sex with her, right? And women might not want their partner having sex with other women because then he could get her pregnant. There are just all kinds of risks that are wrapped up with people staying friends with their exes.
All I can say with that is I highly doubt my dad's going to be getting with mom anytime soon. He lives in Virginia.
Gotcha. Well, maybe not in your particular case, but
I know, but it's in some cases.
Yeah, in some cases, right. Yeah, that's where I see ex hating coming from. I published a bit of research on kind of why people stay friends with their exes. I don't know if you remember me mentioning that study at the beginning of class, but I don't know. This is just a very interesting topic for me personally. I've had a very hard time staying friends with my exes, and to be honest, the reason for it, I think, is I wanted more and they didn't want as much, and so it was just too difficult for me to stay friends with them. Because what can end up happening is you get into this weird middle space where, okay, if a guy and a girl remain friends after a relationship, in some way, and there's no sex, okay? In some ways, women might actually be getting more from that friendship than the man is. So if predominantly women, on average, are going to look for traits that indicate that a person is willing to commit, to invest, then to be someone's friend means you still get access to their help, to their support, to their commitment. You don't have to have sex with the person. That's actually a pretty good deal, right? Versus men, I think a priority for a lot of men is they want to be able to have sex with the people that they're investing effort into. And it sounds kind of dark and it sounds kind of, objectifying in some ways, but I do think that there is that element to the world where men often look for their part. They want to have sex with the people that, opposite sex people that they spend time with. They look for that opportunity to have sex. So it's not
TikTok.
they might not be getting as much out of the relationship.
There's that whole TikTok trend going around about the people's girlfriends calling up their guy friends and lying to them, saying that that they broke up, and watching their reaction most of the time be like, "Oh, did you come over?"
Yeah, right. Yes, actually, I dabbled in TikTok like 2 months ago, and then I stopped using it. But I did see that. Yeah. Yeah, that's. I think that's right. I think that's another kind of part of it is men may form friendships with women. I mean, this goes both ways. Women can do the same thing with men, but people can form friendships with someone to kind of wait in the sidelines, to kind of wait for that moment when they might break up. And if they do break up, then you'll be there to kind of comfort them and scoop them off their feet.
Those DMs.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's again, it sounds kind of Machiavellian. It sounds manipulative. But I think it happens, and people don't, even when people aren't intentionally being manipulative. They might just say, I really like being around you. I like being your friend. You know what? If the opportunity to be more than that came along, I'd jump all over that.
Now we bring up the point of my personal experience with this same topic. Why have all of my exes reported me for rape so far?
Oh man, I don't think I can answer that.
Only had sex with one girl, and that was like 2 years ago. She hasn't reported me, but every girl that has reported me, I haven't even had sex with them.
Well, people's motivation for doing these kinds of things varies widely. I mean, in the most extreme and least likely scenarios, in my opinion, you can can do it maliciously, right? Where someone wasn't sexually assaulted, but you reported as such because they hold some kind of grudge or anger against you. But the people who do that tend to be the minority of people. So often, I mean, yeah, if someone says that they were, often if someone says they were sexually assaulted or they were kind of coerced in some way, they might be telling the truth. It might be a matter of perception. I don't know. We'd have to dig into that, and I don't think we'd want to do that here and on recording.
I'm just going to say this. We consented during the relationship. After the relationship, I, of course, hands off, didn't do anything with them because they broke up with me. We're done.
Right.
And like 2 weeks later, they report me.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. Those issues get very delicate. Yeah. That's the most I can give you.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, we have 3 minutes left. Are there any last minute whatnots that you'd like to address?
I don't know.
All right. Well, let's a lot of the other questions I'm seeing here would probably take us beyond 3 minutes. So let's call it here. I think this was a good talk. Get some sleep, working hard, and I'll catch you next week. Sound good?
Look, can you turn the recording off so I can talk real quick?
Yeah, sure.